I had just started the overnight shift at a 24-hour pharmacy here in New Hampshire. It was my first steady job after high school, so I was trying to do everything right to avoid losing the position. I clocked in every night at 11 p.m. and stayed until 7 a.m. The employee from the previous shift, Rick, was an older guy, maybe in his early 50s, and had worked there longer than anyone else. On my first day, the manager told me he had a habit of taking a while to leave, but that I should just ignore it. I thought it was weird, but I didn't question it because I really needed that job. In practice, it wasn't just taking a while to leave. Rick would just wander around the aisles even after clocking out. He didn't say he was doing inventory. He wasn't putting anything away. He wasn't cleaning anything. He just walked slowly, dragging his feet on the waxed floor, and sometimes he would appear out of nowhere looking over the shelves, as if he were silently watching me. At first, I tried to be polite, but he always asked strange, random questions, like whether I lived alone, what route I took to get home, whether my parents were traveling. Nothing was overtly threatening, but it made me uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. On my second night, he got even stranger. After clocking out, instead of grabbing his things and leaving, he stopped at the end of the hygiene aisle and stared at me for a few seconds as if he were waiting for me to say something. I tried to act natural, kept organizing some boxes of vitamins that had arrived, but I could feel him watching me. When I finally said, "Good night, Rick," he took a moment to respond, like he had been thinking about something else. Then he smiled in this empty, expressionless way and said, "You live far from here, don't you?" I hadn't told anyone in the store that. Later that same night, I was in the back of the stockroom repositioning some items when I heard footsteps behind me. It was way too late for someone to be back there. After 2 in the morning, almost nobody comes in. When I turned around, Rick was standing in the narrow stockroom hallway, even though his shift had ended and he had no reason to be in there. He said he forgot a jacket, but he hadn't worn a jacket on any of the previous days. The way he blocked the passage for a few seconds made my blood run cold. When he finally left, I stood there for about 5 minutes trying to figure out if I was overreacting. On the third night, everything got worse. I was closing up the counter area to organize some products when I heard a noise coming from the parking lot, like someone dragging something heavy across the asphalt. When I went to the automatic doors to check, Rick was standing behind my car, almost completely in the dark, holding a big trash bag with both hands. He didn't move. He didn't even lift his head when the doors opened. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand whether he needed help or if it was some kind of weird joke, but nothing made sense. He just stood there, motionless, staring at the ground. The next day, the manager called me in as soon as my shift started. He said he'd received an anonymous phone call complaining about Rick's behavior and that he had already given him a formal warning. He added that I shouldn't worry about it, but it was obvious that he was uncomfortable too. That same night, I noticed that Rick didn't show up for work and didn't stop by the store at his usual time. The shift was strangely quiet. I should have felt relieved, but part of me kept glancing at the automatic doors, imagining him showing up without warning like he had before. When my shift ended and I headed to the parking lot, I had that automatic habit of looking around before reaching my car. The place was empty, lit only by the weak street lights that always flickered in the wind. Even then, it took me a few seconds to open the door because I kept remembering him standing there the night before. I checked the back seat, checked the trunk, all on autopilot. The drive home was silent, and I kept telling myself it would pass, that he had probably been fired, and that was that. Except when I got to my apartment, there was something on my doorstep. 3 crushed boxes of medication, the same brand that always went missing from the stockroom and that the manager constantly complained about. They hadn't been there when I left for my shift. They weren't there the day before. One of the boxes was folded in a strange way, like someone had been fidgeting with it for a long time. I stared at those boxes for almost a full minute, trying to decide whether I should call someone or pretend it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence at all. I picked up the boxes with a paper towel and left them on the kitchen counter, not touching them directly because they gave me this weird sense of disgust. Like it wasn't just the fact that someone had left them there, but who had left them. I walked around the apartment trying to remember whether I had told anyone at the pharmacy my address. I hadn't. The manager only had my phone number. My coworkers didn't even know which part of town I lived in. And Rick? I had never said anything that could lead him there. Even so, someone put those boxes on my doorstep. It was late, almost 3 in the morning, and I didn't have the courage to go downstairs again to throw them away. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I remembered him leaning his head over the tops of the shelves, watching from above, in that strange way, like he was trying to figure out what made me uncomfortable. The whole night felt heavy, full of creaks in the building and noises I normally wouldn't notice. When the sun finally came up, I left early for work, just so I wouldn't be alone in that apartment. And when I opened the hallway door, I noticed something else. On the doormat right in the center, someone had left a single loose pill, the same kind from the boxes in my kitchen. It looked carefully placed, almost like a silent message. I took the pill with me to the pharmacy because, honestly, I wanted to show the manager and see if he found it as strange as I did. When I got there, he just said it was probably some coworker's bad joke and that I needed to relax a little. But I saw the way he frowned when I asked if he had heard anything about Rick. He only said that Rick wouldn't be coming back and changed the subject quickly. He didn't even ask what I thought of the pill in my hallway. It was almost like he knew more than he wanted to admit. That only made me more unsettled, like I had touched on something I shouldn't have. For the rest of the shift, everything felt unusually normal. I tried focusing on the shelves, the customers, the scanner, the beep of the meds going through. But every time I looked toward the back hallway, I felt like someone had just walked out of there. There was a faint smell of burnt plastic, the same smell I noticed when Rick stood behind my car in the parking lot holding that trash bag. And out of nowhere, the lights in the hallway leading to the stockroom flickered twice, exactly the way they did when he wandered around. It wasn't enough to claim anything, but it was the kind of coincidence you feel in your body before you feel it in your mind. When I went to drop off a restock box in the stockroom, I noticed the door was slightly open. That hadn't happened since the manager installed the new internal latch, specifically because Rick kept hanging around in there during shifts. I pushed the door with my shoulder, half annoyed, half tense, and felt that cold burst of air the AC makes when it's trapped in a closed space. The first thing I saw was a trash bag on the floor just like the ones Rick carried. But this one was empty, crumpled as if someone had been gripping it tightly. No one should have left that there. No one had any reason to be in the stockroom at that hour besides me. I shut the door quickly and tried not to think about it anymore. I continued the shift as best as I could, trying to keep my mind occupied. But around 3 in the morning, when I went to take an order to the drive-thru, I bent down to grab a box and heard something behind me. A short step, just a shift of weight on the floor. It wasn't a customer. It wasn't a coworker. It wasn't anything I could justify. I turned right away, but all I saw was the empty hallway, with the camera blinking on the ceiling. I swear I felt for half a second the same sensation I had in the parking lot when Rick stood behind my car. Like someone was way too close, watching, but not wanting to be seen. When my shift finally ended, all I wanted was to leave as fast as possible. The pharmacy was quiet in a way that made me more alert than tired. I walked out the employee door and headed toward my car, trying not to look at the dark corners of the parking lot. But when I pressed the unlock button on the remote, I heard a metallic sound coming from the side of my car, like someone had brushed against it or bumped it accidentally. I froze immediately. It was the same feeling from that third night, that presence there, standing still, waiting for me to get closer. Only this time I didn't see anyone, just the echo of metal vibrating and the cold wind cutting along the side of the building. I got into the car quickly, locked the doors, and sat there for a few seconds with my hands on the wheel, taking deep breaths. I knew I was getting paranoid, but I also knew that guy had never been just weird. There was something in the way he looked at me, in the way he showed up where he shouldn't. I drove home without looking back, but halfway there I had this stupid impulse to check the back seat in the rearview mirror. It was empty, of course, but the feeling that I wasn't completely alone took minutes to fade. When I parked in the garage, I decided that the next day I was going to request a shift transfer. I really thought that with Rick gone, things would go back to normal. They didn't. The next morning, before leaving for work, I tripped on something at my front door. It was a crushed packet, one of those controlled medication blister packs, placed right in the middle of the doormat. It wasn't mine, and it didn't belong to any neighbor. The worst part was that when I flipped the packaging over, it had a very clear fingerprint on it, like someone had gripped it tightly. My first thought was a security camera, but I live in an old apartment building. No cameras in the hallway. I stood there for a few seconds trying to decide whether to throw it in the trash or take it to the manager. I ended up taking it with me, because some part of me needed proof that I wasn't just losing my mind. When I got to the pharmacy, I casually mentioned the package on my door to the manager. He barely looked up from the computer and just said something like, "Yeah, Rick was kinda weird. Better not think too much about it." As if that solved anything. The rest of the shift passed in an eerie silence, the kind that makes every little sound seem louder than it should. I kept checking the shelf mirrors, imagining him rounding a corner, pressed against the glass, watching like he used to. Nothing happened, but that didn't bring relief. It brought the feeling that he could show up again at any moment, anywhere. On the third morning after that, I got home around 7, too tired to think about anything. I tossed my backpack on the couch and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. When I came back into the hallway, I noticed something stuck under the door, like someone had slid it there while I was at work. I crouched down thinking it was a flyer or some advertisement, but it was another package, this time even dirtier, like it had been found on the ground of some parking lot. What really made my stomach drop was seeing that on the back, someone had written my name. It wasn't printed, it wasn't a label. It was handwritten, crooked, pressed hard into the cardboard. And Rick never knew my address. At least, not because I told him. I spent the rest of that morning pacing around the living room, trying to think of logical explanations. Maybe someone at work had pulled a stupid prank. Maybe Rick had gotten my address from HR files. Maybe I was interpreting everything the wrong way because I was exhausted. But what shattered all my attempts to rationalize was the silence in the building. No one had walked down my hallway for hours. I would have heard it. And the package was cold, like it had been placed there not long before I got home. I kept the door locked, the chain on, and my phone in my hand, listening to every creak in the pipes as if it were someone leaning against the wood. I knew it wasn't a coincidence, and I also knew for some reason that he hadn't finished whatever he meant to do. That night, before leaving for my shift, I left the porch light on purpose, just to see if anyone approached the door while I was gone. At work, I tried to act normal, but any customer who spent more than a few seconds in an aisle made me tense. The manager spent most of the night in his office, and I kept hearing the automatic doors click, expecting to see someone standing there, someone I already knew exactly who it would be. When my shift ended around 6, I sat in my car for a few minutes staring at the empty parking lot, trying to gather the courage to drive back home. The fear of finding another package at my door was so strong, I almost considered sleeping in the car. When I finally got to my building, I noticed the porch light was off. I had left it on. That froze me instantly. I walked up slowly with my keys in my hand, and only then did I see that my apartment door looked exactly the way I had left it. With one exception. The doormat was slightly crooked, as if someone had nudged it with their foot. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, ready to step back if I saw anything out of place. Everything looked normal. Nothing in the living room, nothing in the hallway, nothing in the kitchen. It wasn't until I reached the bedroom that I noticed. The window was slightly open, even though I had closed it before leaving. And on the windowsill, on the inside, there was a third empty package. No note, no writing. Just placed there, neatly aligned. Since that morning, I haven't heard anything about Rick. Not at work, not anywhere. And I've never again been able to sleep with the bedroom door closed. Story 2. I was 20 years old when I started working at that small coffee shop in Towson, Maryland. It was my first steady job while I tried to juggle college classes and the rent of my studio apartment. And I liked the routine because the flow of customers slowed down in the late afternoon. That was when he started showing up almost every day. Always the same order, always the same way of avoiding eye contact, always the same pauses between one sentence and the next. At first I thought he was just shy or socially awkward, since there were plenty of customers like that around there. It was only after a few weeks that I realized he paid attention to everything I did, even to small habits I hadn't noticed about myself. The first time something truly bothered me was when he mentioned my dog. I never talked about him at work. One day while I was making the latte he always ordered, he said, I imagine your beagle is better today. He doesn't like the rain, right? I froze because no one there knew I had a beagle, and only my closest friends knew about his habit of getting restless whenever the weather turned bad. I asked how he knew, and he just smiled in this strange way like it was the most obvious thing in the world. That day I made sure to walk home with a coworker, but I tried convincing myself that maybe I had posted something about the dog on social media without remembering. The following week he started showing up at the exact same times, even when the shop was nearly empty. He always sat at the corner table staring at his phone without actually using it. When I went to clean the tables, he'd make casual comments about things that weren't public, like the course I was taking or the name of a professor I only ever mentioned in academic assignments. I tried responding politely, but it made me more and more uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of conversation where you feel the person is curious. It felt like he was testing whether I remembered that he knew those things. What really made me understand something was wrong was the day I left late because of a delayed delivery. When I turned off the lights and stepped out through the side door, I noticed someone walking at the same pace as me, a few meters behind. I glanced quickly without turning my head and recognized his silhouette. It wasn't a coincidence. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the area at that time because the coffee shop had been closed for a while. My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my pace steady. When I passed under a streetlight that was out, I saw his shadow stretch across the pavement exactly when I slowed down. It was like he was waiting for me to notice. I didn't say anything. I just sped up until I reached my street, turned the corner, and went into my building without looking back. When I got home, my hands were shaking so much I could barely get the key into the lock. As soon as I stepped inside, I double-locked the door and tried to convince myself I might have imagined it. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. But when I went to turn on the porch light to grab a package I'd seen earlier, I noticed something that made my stomach drop instantly. There was a coffee cup from the shop sitting at my door. The exact model we used with my name written on it, in my handwriting, the rushed version with the crooked M. Except I hadn't written a single cup that day. I had only worked in the stockroom and hadn't even gone near the drink station. I picked up the cup without touching the top as if it were contaminated. It was empty but cold, like it had been placed there only minutes earlier. That's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence. He not only knew where I lived, he had come to my door while I was still on the street, possibly following me to the corner and then circling the block to leave it there as… what? A warning? A message? I sat on the living room floor trying to steady my breathing, replaying my walk home in my head. The feeling I had was that if I looked out the window right then, I'd see him standing on the sidewalk, watching, as if he were waiting for my reaction. My first impulse was to call the police, but I froze trying to imagine what I'd even say. A customer comes to my coffee shop a lot, and today left a cup on my porch. It sounded too weak, even with everything he had already hinted he knew about me. So I opened the external camera app on my phone, the ones my dad installed when I moved in. The porch camera didn't show anyone leaving the cup. Nothing. Just a short corrupted recording where the image goes black for a few seconds, like someone put a hand over the lens. But there's no approach, no shadow, no sound. That made me even more nervous because it meant someone knew exactly where the camera was and how to avoid being seen. I paced around the apartment, windows closed, phone in hand. Every little creak on the wood of the balcony made my whole body tense. It took almost an hour before I got the courage to peek through the curtain facing the street. There was no one there, but I saw something that made my stomach twist. The same streetlight that had been off earlier, the one where I'd seen his shadow, was now on. And right beneath it, on the wet concrete, were two footprints, facing my house. As if someone had stood there for a long time. That's when I understood that he hadn't just followed me. He wanted me to know he followed me. And from that night on, I never walked home again. Story 3. I live in Appleton, Wisconsin, and I work at a very small logistics company. The kind where everyone knows everyone's name and any schedule change becomes news. Earlier this year, I asked to switch from the afternoon shift to the morning shift because I simply couldn't stand working with Logan anymore. He wasn't aggressive or anything like that, but he had this strange way of watching me while I did anything, from sorting boxes to eating lunch. He always asked personal questions out of nowhere, like whether I lived alone, what time I woke up, whether my building had a side entrance. I tried laughing it off and changing the subject, but it got worse to the point where I felt genuine discomfort on the days I knew I would have to see him. When I finally got the shift change approved, I thought I'd feel relieved immediately, and for a day or two I did. But on the very first morning of my new schedule, when I parked in the company lot, I saw Logan leaning against my car. He wasn't wearing his uniform, didn't have his badge, didn't even look ready to work. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, like he had been waiting for me. He greeted me with a good morning and then said, "I missed our conversations yesterday." I gave a polite response and went into the building quickly, trying not to show how deeply that froze me inside. Over the next few days, it became a routine. I'd arrive around 6:15 a.m., and he was already there, always leaning against my car or sitting on the curb near my parking spot. He didn't do anything except watch me and say things like, "You're arriving later than yesterday," or "You look tired today." He had no reason to be there at that hour since his shift didn't start until the afternoon. Sometimes I rushed in so quickly that I barely heard what he said, but I could feel that he was mentally noting every detail of my behavior. I began to get anxious before even leaving home, looking out my window to make sure no one was standing on the street. One day I gathered the courage to talk to the manager. I explained everything, and I'm including that I didn't feel comfortable with the way Logan waited for me every day for no reason. The manager immediately got serious and said he had already received other complaints about Logan and would take care of it. The next day, Logan didn't show up in the parking lot, nor the next, nor the entire week. The manager called me later and told me that Logan had been let go and wouldn't be returning to the company. I should have felt relieved, but the truth is I felt something strange, like it had all happened too quickly, with no real explanation. That night I got home around 7:40 p.m. I live alone in a small second-floor apartment. I always leave the living room light on when I go out, more out of habit than anything else. I put the key in the door and noticed it felt a little lighter when I turned it, as if the latch had been touched from the inside recently. I didn't think much of it, but when I closed the door behind me, I saw something tucked into the top of the door frame. Something that definitely hadn't been there in the morning. It was my company badge, the same one I had left inside my backpack zipped up on my desk at work. It was perfectly aligned in the doorframe gap, placed carefully, as if someone had lifted their hand and slid it there slowly. My whole body went hot and cold at the same time. I just stared at the badge, trying to understand how it was possible for someone to take it at work and follow me home without me noticing. I checked my backpack, and my actual badge was still there, meaning the one on my door wasn't mine. It was a copy, but with my photo and name identical in every way, except a bit dirty on the back, like it had been dragged on the ground. I locked every door and window, checked the peephole, walked around the apartment with my phone in hand but didn't find anything else. Just that badge, placed in a way that made it clear someone had been very close to my door, likely while I was sleeping. I paced the living room trying to reason it out, but my mind kept spinning in circles. I tried remembering any moment when Logan could have taken a photo of me or something that could help him fake a badge, but it didn't make sense. The company controls everything, including replacements, and no one would have any reason to print a second one for me. The feeling I had, holding that cold plastic card in my hand, was that he'd made it for a purpose, like he wanted me to see it as a warning. I thought about calling the manager, but it was almost 8 at night and I knew he wouldn't answer. I also thought about calling the police, but again, what would I even say? My coworker left a badge on my door? No one would take that seriously. I did what most people would do. I pushed the table against the door, closed the curtains, and left the TV on to distract myself. But after about 15 minutes, I heard a sharp creak from the hallway, like someone had leaned their shoulder against the door from the outside. I froze on the couch, listening carefully. The building had always been quiet, and that kind of noise never happened. I moved slowly toward the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, dark, lit only by the green exit sign reflecting on the carpet. I was about to walk back to the couch when I noticed something new on the floor, right at the base of my door. A small smudge of dirt, like the sole of a shoe, had slid there just seconds earlier. I just stood there staring at that mark, trying to figure out if I could have made it myself earlier, but it didn't make sense. I had come in through the back parking lot and walked straight inside without dragging my foot like that. The smudge was fresh with a faint wet outline like the floor had been touched only minutes before. I backed away from the door, now with the feeling that someone could still be in the hallway, maybe standing just out of the peephole's view. I grabbed my phone and tried using the camera to record under the gap at the bottom of the door, but all I saw was total darkness and the reflection of my apartment light. I sat on the floor leaning against the wall, with the table still blocking the door. The TV buzzed softly in the background, but it felt distant compared to the sound of my own heartbeat. I wondered whether Logan would actually be capable of showing up there. He had never shown signs of violence, but he always had that way of staring at you as if he were evaluating something. I remembered the time he told me, for no reason at all, that he knew my license plate by heart. I laughed at the time, trying to treat it like a joke, but now it replayed in my head in a completely different way. The silence of the entire apartment only amplified the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stayed like that for several more minutes, trying to decide whether to call someone. I thought about calling the manager, but figured he'd just tell me not to encourage paranoia, like he did before when I mentioned Logan's behavior. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My coworker left a badge at my door? It sounded so weak I wouldn't even know how to explain it. What really bothered me was knowing he had to get very close to the door to slide the badge exactly into the frame, like he wanted me to see it the moment I walked in. The idea that he had been there while I was sleeping made my stomach twist. I got up slowly and walked to the living room window, peeking through the blinds. The street was completely empty, just the yellow glow of the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I tried to see if there was a car parked nearby, any movement, anything that suggested someone might still be watching the building. Nothing. Even so, I closed the blinds completely and turned off all the lights, leaving only the hallway one on. I started wondering if Logan still had the old building key, or if he had found some way to get inside without being noticed. The more I thought about it, the worse the sensation got, like he had planned this ahead of time. I went back to the badge still pressed into the doorframe and picked it up carefully, as if touching that plastic could make the bad feeling worse. The badge was cold, like it had been left there not long before. The photo on it stared back at me with that expression he always had at work, blank yet insistent, like he was waiting for me to say something. I kept thinking about how he made it to my door without any neighbors noticing. The hallway is narrow and usually anyone coming up the stairs makes noise, but I hadn't heard a thing. No footsteps, no doors, nothing. I took the badge to the kitchen and set it on the table, trying to breathe deeply and think logically. Maybe someone found the badge lying around somewhere and decided to return it. Maybe I was overreacting. But the more I repeated that to myself, the less sense it made. I had seen Logan wearing his badge on Monday and no one else had any reason to give it back to me. The only person who knew I usually entered the building through the side door, and that I always took my badge out of my pocket as soon as I got home, was him. The feeling of being watched started growing again, heavy, like someone was in some corner of the apartment waiting for me to let my guard down to make sure they were locked, something I had never really worried about until that moment. The living room window was closed, but the curtain was slightly out of place, as if it had been moved. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I ran my hand across the glass looking for any smudge or touch, but there was nothing. Even so, the feeling that someone had stood there, right outside, watching me, wouldn't leave. My building has no external-facing cameras, so there was no way to confirm if anyone had been there that night. That only made everything more confusing and more unsettling. I tried calling a friend of mine just so I wouldn't be completely alone with those thoughts, but the call went straight to voicemail. I looked at the badge again, still sitting on the table, and realized it had been placed exactly the way Logan used to organize his belongings at work, perfectly aligned, facing up, with the lanyard tucked underneath. It wasn't random. It was intentional. It was a message. The worst part was that he had left it there without breaking in, without making noise, without leaving footprints or anything that could help me prove it really happened. It was as if he were saying, "I can still find you no matter what shift you're on." I went to the kitchen because my throat suddenly felt dry, but I noticed my hand was trembling a little when I turned on the faucet. It was like my body understood the situation more clearly than my mind did. I stood there leaning against the counter, trying to rationalize things logically. Maybe someone had found the badge on the ground. Maybe I had dropped it myself. Maybe it was just a huge coincidence. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I kept remembering the way Logan spoke to me during the last few weeks. Always with that glazed look in his eyes, as if he were trying to guess what I would say before I even opened my mouth. And now that object was inside my home with no explanation. I picked up my phone again and thought about calling the manager, but stopped before I even unlocked the screen. What would I say? That a former coworker who supposedly had no reason to know anything about my life anymore had entered my apartment without leaving a trace? Even I didn't know how to explain that without sounding dramatic. Deep down, what scared me the most was the fact that I hadn't heard anything. No door, no footsteps, no noise at all. Either he came in while I was still at work, and I only noticed now, or he had been here while I slept. And neither of those possibilities made me feel safe. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the badge, trying to understand how someone goes from weird coworker to person who can silently get into your home without you noticing. I locked the door latch and checked every window, even though I knew I had already done that before leaving for work. Nothing looked forced, nothing was broken. What made me even more nervous was realizing the living room window was only pushed shut, not locked. I was absolutely sure I had locked that window, because it was cold outside and I always double-check everything before leaving. I stared at the latch for a while, trying to remember if I could have left it like that for some reason, but it didn't make sense. And the way the window was positioned, just enough for someone to slip a hand in and push, gave me a sinking feeling in my chest. I went back to the bedroom but couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the door as if I expected it to move. The badge was still on my nightstand, and its presence alone seemed to fill the room in a strange way. I kept thinking about all the uncomfortable conversations I'd had with Logan before changing shifts. He always tried to find out where I lived, what time I got home, and I always gave vague answers. Now it all made sense. He must have tried to find out anyway. At that moment, everything inside me said I wasn't imagining anything. Someone had really been inside my apartment, and that someone was fixated on me in a way I couldn't explain. I picked up the phone to call the police, but froze with my finger hovering over the screen. I didn't have anything concrete to show, no signs of forced entry, no damage, just a badge that technically belonged to me. It would sound like some paranoid guy who forgot to lock a window. I paced around the apartment with the phone in hand, trying to decide whether to ask for help or whether I was exaggerating. The silence inside the place felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself was colder near the door. Every few minutes I glanced at the living room window, imagining someone standing there for a long time, watching. I ended up calling the manager, even though it was nearly midnight. He answered with a sleepy voice, and I tried to explain everything quickly, but he didn't seem to think it was serious. He just said, "Man, Logan was let go today. He got pretty upset, just stay alert," and hung up. That only made the feeling worse. If he had really been fired earlier that day, then maybe he'd come straight here afterward. I spent the rest of the night sitting with my back against the front door, a chair braced under the handle, listening for any noise that might mean someone was trying to get in again. Around 3 a.m, I heard a metallic noise coming from the parking area outside. It wasn't loud, but enough to make my whole body lock up. I walked slowly to the living room window and lifted the blinds just a little. The parking lot was almost empty, lit only by the weak streetlight at the corner. My car was there, just like before. But something was off. The passenger door was slightly open. I was absolutely sure I had locked the car with the remote when I got home. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting to see some movement, but nothing happened. The cold feeling that hit me wasn't from the apartment. It was the same sensation I got at work whenever I noticed Logan staring too much. I thought about going downstairs, but my hands started shaking just imagining walking up to the car and seeing someone lying in the back seat or crouched between the seats. I stayed at the window for a long time watching, until I heard a dull sound coming from my apartment door. It wasn't a knock. It was like someone leaned their weight against the wood for a moment and then walked away down the hallway. I waited for a neighbor to open their door or someone to speak or anything, but the building stayed completely silent. The only thing I managed to do was push the chair harder under the doorknob and stand there, trying to slow my breathing. When I finally got the courage to look out the blinds again, the passenger door of my car was closed. That only made everything worse, because I hadn't heard it shut, nor footsteps. Nothing. I tried convincing myself I had imagined it, that the light had created a weird shadow, but deep down I knew I hadn't. And the hallway was still too quiet. No neighbor getting home late, no one coming down the stairs. It was like the whole building had frozen with me, waiting for something to happen. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I think my coworker opened my car while I was sleeping. I sounded insane even imagining the sentence. I checked the door lock again. When I pulled the chain to test it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Right in the lower corner of the door frame, where the carpet meets the wood, there was a new little scratch, like someone had tried to force something thin in there. I ran my finger over it and felt the wood rough and freshly scraped. That scratch definitely hadn't been there when I got home. The feeling of not being alone in the building that night suddenly became very real. The next morning I went to work trying to act normal, but everything felt off. Logan wasn't there, which should have been a relief, but the other employees mentioned he had shown up earlier in the parking lot, looking for someone. No one knew who. When I walked into the office, my supervisor asked why my badge was hanging on the lost and found board. I said I had never lost it, and I really hadn't. I instinctively touched my neck, trying to remember the last time I used it. I usually left it on the kitchen table, always in the same spot. I started wondering if he had taken it from my house or if I had dropped it, but nothing made sense. When I picked up the badge from the board, I noticed the plastic was damp, like it had been outside in the dew. I definitely hadn't left it outside. I spent the rest of the day trying to work, but anyone walking behind me made me tense. More than once I thought I saw someone standing outside the building, leaning against the wall near the cars, but every time I looked twice, it wasn't him. I tried ignoring it, telling myself I was just tired, that everything was a coincidence. But when I went home, the scratch on the door looked bigger, like someone had tried again during the day. And the worst part was that I hadn't heard anything at all. I decided to leave a chair under the doorknob again that night just to be safe. And even then I slept terribly, with the constant feeling that someone was standing in the hallway, listening to my apartment. The next night I got home later than usual. I tried not thinking about any of it, but the moment I parked I felt that strange sensation again, that someone was nearby. My building is quiet and any unusual sound stands out, so I stayed in the car for a few seconds before getting out. When I finally got out and walked toward my apartment, I noticed the door frame. The badge was there again, placed in the exact same way I had found it the previous night, but this time it couldn't have been a mistake. I had my badge on my neck. I even touched it a few times just to confirm. Someone had either placed a replica there or had stolen mine at some point without my noticing. I had no idea which was worse. I got into the apartment as fast as I could, locked the doors, closed the windows, and pushed the chair back under the doorknob. But this time I couldn't relax for even a minute. I kept pacing around the living room, trying to figure out whether this was stalking, obsession, or just an attempt to scare me. I didn't want to involve the police since I still had no concrete evidence. But around midnight, while I was trying to watch something on TV, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging footsteps, like someone walking carefully not to make noise. They stopped right in front of my door. Then came a soft sound. Not a knock, but like someone lightly dragging a fingernail across the wood. I froze, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. After about 30 seconds, and though it felt much longer, the sound stopped. The footsteps continued down the hallway and faded down the stairs. I stood there in the middle of the living room, too scared to open the door or even look through the peephole. I stayed up all night on the couch with every light in the apartment on. When I woke up, my phone was vibrating in my hand. It was a message from the manager saying Logan wouldn't be coming back to the company. They'd received formal notification that he had moved to another state. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide whether I felt relieved or terrified. I still live in the same apartment, but every now and then I find small things near the door. An empty package, a badge clip, a piece of adhesive label. Nothing I can prove, nothing worth a police report, but always left there during the night. Sometimes I think Logan never accepted that shift change. and that somehow he found other ways to keep the conversations going. I don't know if he's still in Wisconsin, if he really moved, or if he's just waiting for me to let my guard down. What I do know is that, to this day, I sleep with a chair braced against the door every single night. Story 4. I had only been working as a substitute teacher at that public school in Delaware for about 2 weeks, and I was still trying to get used to the old building, the classrooms that smelled like damp paper, and the slightly chaotic rhythm of the staff. That night I stayed late because I needed to finish grading some tests the students would take the next day. The storm outside was getting worse, and I didn't want to drive home in heavy rain, so I decided to wait for the weather to calm down a bit. Only the night custodian was in the building with me, a man named Mr. Horros, whom I had seen a few times but never talked to for more than a few seconds. Around 9:30, I noticed he started passing through the hallways more often. At first I thought it was just part of his routine, but then I realized he was turning off the lights behind me every time I switched rooms to grab something. He did it slowly, unbothered, as if it were completely normal to leave me in the dark the moment I walked out. Every time he showed up, he said something strange like, "No one comes here at this hour," or, "This building gets really empty at night." I gave a nervous laugh the first time, but after a while I started feeling there was something wrong with his behavior. When I finally decided to leave, I noticed that all the doors leading to the parking lot were locked, including the one I had used earlier. I tried not to panic immediately, thinking maybe it was standard procedure because of the storm. I walked to the main entrance to try unlocking it manually, but the spare key the vice principal gave me didn't work. The feeling of being alone in a huge building with all the lights behind me turned off started to get under my skin in a strange way. I walked back through the hallway trying to find Mr. Horros to ask if he had locked everything early, but every classroom I passed was completely dark. Rain was slamming against the windows, and the whole school felt colder than it should, as if the heating system had been turned off too. When I got close to the teacher's lounge, I heard slow footsteps in the side hallway, like someone was dragging their foot. I assumed it was him, but when I called his name, no one answered. The footsteps stopped instantly, as if the person froze when they heard me. I stood there for a few seconds trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, but the hallway was pitch black. The only light came from the small emergency lamps on the ceiling, flickering because of the storm. I pulled out my phone to call the school manager or even the police, but there was no service at all, not even one bar. That's when it started sinking in that I was really stuck inside. I decided to go back to the room where I'd been grading tests, just so I could have some light and a door I could close if needed. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the light at the far end, the one that had been on when I arrived, was now also turned off. It was like someone was shutting down the building slowly behind me, hallway by hallway. I tried telling myself the custodian was saving energy, but the way he did it, always after I passed, felt wrong. When I got to the classroom, I closed the door and tried to lock it, only to realize that particular model didn't lock from the inside. That made me even more nervous because it meant anyone could just walk in. And that's when the first real strange thing happened. Under the door, a faint light began moving like someone was walking very slowly with a flashlight pointed at the floor. The light stopped exactly in front of the door without moving to either side, without trembling. I froze completely, trying to hear any breathing, any movement, anything that would confirm someone was there. But there was no sound at all. Just that narrow beam of light. It didn't look like someone cleaning. It looked like someone standing still, silent, holding the flashlight pointed at the ground. I stayed there for a few minutes, standing behind the desk, trying to decide whether to open the door or wait. My heart was racing out of control, and my hands were starting to sweat. I picked up my phone again to call someone, but the screen still showed zero signal. I even tried connecting to the school's Wi-Fi, but it didn't show up. The light under the door remained still, which only made me more anxious. No one stands like that for so long without moving. When I finally gathered the courage to approach the door, the light vanished instantly, like someone had covered the flashlight with their hand. I waited a few seconds before opening the door, just a crack, but the hallway was completely dark. Only the distant sound of rain hitting the windows broke the silence. I stepped out slowly, trying to see if he was still nearby, but there was nothing. Still, I had that physical sensation, like someone was standing just a few feet away in the darkness. I knew I needed to find a way out, any way out, because none of this was normal, and the more I thought, the less sense it made for him to be shutting the lights off like that. I started walking slowly down the corridor, keeping my phone's light pointed at the floor so it wouldn't be too bright. All the classroom doors were closed, and some had those tiny frosted windows that reflected just a little bit of my light. Every step echoed, and I tried walking softly, but the emptiness of the school amplified everything. When I turned down the hallway that led to the side exit, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The emergency door had been slightly open when I arrived, but now it was completely closed, and the panic bar wouldn't budge when I pushed. He had locked it from the outside. At that exact moment, I heard something fall a few meters behind me, like a metal lid hitting the floor. I spun the flashlight back immediately, lighting up the empty hallway, but the sound was too clear to be my imagination. My whole body went rigid. It felt like my brain was yelling at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stared into that dark hallway, waiting for another sound, some kind of confirmation someone was there. After a few painfully long seconds, I heard a slow dragging noise like a shoe sliding across the waxed floor. That's when my legs finally responded, and I ran back to the classroom. I slammed the door shut and turned the lock immediately, even though I knew it wouldn't do much if he really wanted to come in. The room was completely dark except for the faint glow of my phone, which I left facing the desk so it wouldn't light up too much of the room. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried calling the principal, my mom, even 911, but nothing went through. My phone almost always worked inside that school, but that night the signal was just gone. That made me even more nervous. I didn't know if it was just bad luck or if it had something to do with the custodian tampering with something. A few minutes later, while I was trying to control my breathing, I saw a shadow pass under the door, moving very slowly, like someone walking close to the floor. Then a light appeared on his flashlight. It stayed there, pointed directly at the crack under the door, not moving. I froze completely, barely breathing, with my phone vibrating in my hand. The light didn't shake, didn't get closer, didn't go away. It just stayed there, like he was listening, waiting for any sound from me. That 1 minute staring at that unmoving light felt endless. When I closed the door behind me earlier, my hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't turn the key. I leaned my forehead against the wood for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The only light inside the room came from my laptop still open on the desk, illuminating a small circle in the center. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just dragging something. Maybe he didn't realize he'd locked me in. But then I remembered how he said, "No one comes here at this hour," and the way the flashlight stayed under the door earlier. I couldn't ignore that. Then suddenly the bottom of the door went completely dark. The ambient hallway light disappeared, blocked by something, or someone standing right outside. My throat went completely dry. I didn't move. The person, I didn't know if it was him, but it was obvious, and I didn't move either. No breathing, no footsteps, nothing. Just that crushing silence, as if the air itself had thickened. For a moment, I wondered if he was trying to hear whether I was still inside. After maybe 20 seconds, the shadow began moving again. Slowly, like someone dragging their feet away from the door. I sat on the floor for a few more minutes, trying to decide whether what had just happened was real, or if fear had gone too far. When I finally heard faint sirens approaching, I almost cried with relief. The police came in through the side door, the same one he had locked, and asked why the whole school was in complete darkness. I tried explaining what had happened, but what bothered me most was that they found nothing but lights turned off, all the doors unlocked again, and his giant keyring dropped right in the middle of the hallway, exactly where his flashlight had been stopped for so long. After they escorted me to my car and I could finally breathe again, the principal called me the next day saying the custodian hadn't shown up since the beginning of the week, and no one knew where he was or why the keys had been left there. I never went back to that school, and even now, whenever I walk down a hallway or turn a light off, I still expect to see a flashlight stopped outside a door, completely still, like someone deciding whether they should come in. Story 5. My name is Emily. I was 16 when this happened, and I lived with my mom in a small house in Barra, Vermont. It was October, early fall, and I was doing a temporary job at the town's public library, about a 20-minute walk from our house. I took that job whenever they needed someone to fill in for vacations or holidays. and my mom said it was good for me to get some experience. At that time, I was spending almost every afternoon there, cataloging books, wiping down tables, and helping people find specific sections. It was all very calm, and I actually liked it, especially because I'd always been a shy person and the quiet atmosphere of the library made me feel comfortable. The only thing that made me even slightly uneasy was a volunteer named Mark, a man in his 30s, quiet, always showing up at the exact same times. But I tried not to think too much about it because everyone kept saying he was just helpful. Mark wasn't creepy in the sense of doing something blatantly wrong, but the way he was always there, always offering help even when I didn't need it. It made me tense. He spoke softly, almost mumbling, and he never looked directly into my eyes. I had the impression he always knew when I arrived, because he showed up minutes afterward, even on days when I came in earlier or later. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but on the day everything started, he said something that made me stop typing immediately. He told me he hoped my blue towel had dried already. Completely out of nowhere, no context. I froze for a few seconds, just staring at him, trying to understand how he could possibly know I had left a blue towel hanging in my bedroom window that morning. I remember feeling my whole body heat up and then go cold, like someone had opened a door behind me. I tried laughing like it was a coincidence, but my mind was racing because no one at the library could see the back of my house. I kept repeating to myself that maybe my mom mentioned it to someone, or maybe I said something without noticing, but it didn't make sense. Mark kept sorting a pile of books as if he hadn't said anything weird. After a few minutes pretending everything was normal, I went to the staff room to drink some water and calm down. My hand was shaking when I turned on the faucet, and I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that he was just an odd guy. But when I walked back to the counter, he asked if I had managed to study at that hour of the night, and my stomach dropped. I had stayed up until almost midnight revising some tests in my bedroom, in silence with no lights on. The window cracked open just a little because it was warm. No one knew that. I asked him how he knew those things, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out thinner than I wanted. He looked away, like he realized he had said too much. He said, "You can see a lot of things when you pay attention." That was enough to make me step back. The library was quiet. The only sound was someone turning pages far in the back. The white ceiling lights made everything bright but cold, and I had the terrible feeling anyone could see I was starting to panic. I asked him directly if he had been going to my house. He started stuttering, saying it wasn't like that I was misunderstanding. The more he talked, the worse it felt because he never actually denied anything. He just kept saying I needed to understand the reason. I told him I was going to get the manager and that this wasn't normal. When I turned to walk toward the office, Mark suddenly started crying in a strange, quiet way, like he was trying to hold everything in. He kept saying he didn't want to scare me, that he just wanted to make sure I was okay. When I asked what that was supposed to mean, he said, still crying, that he wouldn't go up on the roof anymore. My chest tightened instantly. I didn't even reply. I just stood there staring at him, trying to piece everything together, because my bedroom window was directly above the back roof of the house. The only thing I could think about was the noise I had heard a few nights earlier, like footsteps outside, but I assumed it was just branches in the wind. He looked sorry but also confused, like he didn't grasp how serious his confession was. I left the counter almost tripping over my own feet and went straight to the manager, Mr. Horros, the kind of person who was calm no matter what. I told him everything quickly, barely breathing, and he stood up immediately, not even asking if I was exaggerating. We walked back together to where Mark had been, but he was gone. His jacket was still hanging on the volunteer chair, but he had disappeared. Mr. Horros told me to wait in his office and lock the door, saying he'd call the police just to file a report. While he talked on the phone, I stared at the window facing the parking lot, imagining Mark standing somewhere just out of view. My hand was freezing around my phone, and all I could think about was my house, my mom, and the fact that he knew things only someone physically close would know. Mr. Horros insisted on driving me home after the police asked a few basic questions at the library. The drive felt much longer than usual, and I spent the entire time staring out the window, looking for headlights behind us or someone walking along the sidewalk. My house is on a quiet street with few homes and almost no movement at night, so when he pulled up, my stomach was already tight, imagining what we might find, My mom opened the door before I even got close. She already looked worried because the manager had explained that something serious had happened. I stepped inside, shaking, trying not to scare her even more, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Mr. Harris asked if he could check the backyard just to be safe, and my mom agreed. We walked with him to the side of the house where the low roof sits right below my bedroom window. I had never paid much attention to that area, but as soon as we got there, Mr. Harris pointed to some marks on the siding, like someone had planted their foot there several times to climb up. There was dirt smeared on it and some dented spots. My mom said my name in a voice I'd never heard her use, and when I looked up at my bedroom window, I could see finger marks on the glass, like someone had touched it recently, dragging their hand across the bottom. My legs almost gave out. The night before, I had slept with that window only pushed closed, not locked, thinking nothing of it. Mr. Harris told us to go inside and lock everything while he called the police again, this time urgently. The police came fast, 2 patrol cars and waking up the whole street. The officers went straight to the side of the house and started scanning everything with their flashlights. I watched from the living room window while my mom spoke with one of them. I could clearly see the trail of marks on the siding, and it made me feel sick. One of the officers asked to see my bedroom, and I went upstairs with her. As soon as I walked in, I smelled something faint, damp soil, and it made my stomach twist because I knew I hadn't tracked anything in there. She inspected the window, shined her flashlight over the finger marks, and then asked if I'd heard anything the past few nights. I told her about the noises on the roof, the footsteps-like sounds, and as I spoke, I realized I should never have ignored it. The officer breathed out quietly, like she'd seen this kind of situation many times before. They stayed out front for a long time, talking softly and taking notes, but they didn't find anything else. No sign he was still nearby. No object left behind. Nothing to show how long he'd been doing this. When they finally left, they told us to keep the windows locked and to call immediately if anything strange happened again. The house felt heavy and silent, like sound couldn't move. My mom sat with me on the couch holding me, saying she wouldn't let anything happen to me, but I barely responded. What terrified me most was that he hadn't been found. He had simply vanished, like he knew exactly when to stop. That night, even exhausted, it took hours before I could close my eyes, and every tiny noise in the house made my heart race again. I couldn't sleep in my room that night. I stayed on the living room couch because from there I could see the front door and the big window. Somehow it made me feel slightly more in control. My mom left one of the small lights on and stayed awake with me for a while, eventually dozing off in the armchair. Around 3 in the morning, when the house was completely quiet, I heard a creak from the back of the house, like someone stepped on a loose board on the deck. My whole body froze. I couldn't even call my mom. I just listened, waiting for the next sound. The street light doesn't reach that area, so it was impossible to see anything from the side window. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, the noise stopped, but the silence afterward didn't feel normal. It was the kind of silence you pay attention to because you think something is hiding inside it. I sat there hugging my knees, staring at the door like it might change shape at any moment. When the sky finally started to get a bit lighter, I got up slowly and went to the kitchen for water. The faint morning light made everything look cold, and for some reason I felt the need to look out the window again, just to be sure. No one, nothing out of place, but when I turned back toward the hallway, something made me stop. A tiny bit of dirt on the floor right near the back door, like someone had stepped there before leaving. I stared at it for a long time until my mom woke up and asked if I was okay. I just told her I didn't want to work at that library anymore, and that I didn't want to stay home alone for a while. She didn't ask a single question. We spent the whole day trying to act normal, but my mind kept circling back to the same horrifying question. How long had he been watching me before that day? Story 6. My name is Daniel. I'm 28 years old and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. At the time this happened, I worked in a small factory near Wyoming, and my shift always ended at 11 p.m. The drive home was always the same. A long, quiet residential street with few houses and almost no movement at that hour. I liked that drive because it gave me a few minutes of silence after a whole day of machines and voices. I drove slowly, always with the windows closed because of the cold fall wind. Everything was routine, always the same, until I started noticing a guy walking on the sidewalk in the exact same spot every night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just someone taking a late walk, listening to music or something like that. But after about 3 nights, I realized it wasn't just coincidence. He always appeared on my right side, on the sidewalk, right in front of a crooked streetlight that gave off a dim yellow glow. He walked at the same pace with his arms stiff at his sides, staring straight ahead, always moving toward my car. But there was something off. I never saw him actually pass me. At the exact moment he should have appeared next to my window, he simply wasn't there anymore. I checked the rearview mirror afterward and there was nothing. No silhouette walking away, nobody in the opposite direction. I tried convincing myself I was distracted, but the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. He really did vanish at that exact spot like someone had switched off a light. After almost a week of seeing that guy in the same place, I started driving slower whenever I approached the streetlight. I wanted to observe every detail, to confirm I wasn't imagining things. It was always the same image. A thin man, dark jacket, hands in his pockets, short steps, head slightly lowered. He never changed. It didn't matter if it was windy, raining, or completely dry. He appeared exactly the same way. On that particular night, I slowed down almost to a stop just to see if he would really disappear, or if I was missing something. And, as always, the moment he should have come into view beside my car, nothing. The sidewalk was empty, as if no one had ever been there. My stomach tightened because I was absolutely sure I had seen him walking seconds earlier. When I pulled into my street, the feeling that something was wrong only got worse. My neighborhood is quiet, with houses spaced far apart and dim garden lights. I turned the corner like usual, ready to park in my driveway, but I had this weird, heavy feeling in my chest, like I had brought something home with me without realizing it. I got inside quickly, locked the door, and spent a while looking out the living room window, trying to laugh it off. My brain kept saying I was just tired from work, that it was just a late-night pedestrian. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way he vanished. He didn't slow down, didn't turn around, didn't cross behind the car. He was just gone in the next second. And that started to bother me in a way I couldn't explain, because it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt intentional. The next night I decided I needed to record it, even if it was just to show someone and hear that I was overreacting. I left work at the usual time, set my phone in the dashboard mount, and started recording before I even turned onto the street with the crooked light. I was nervous, that weird feeling of anticipation. Part of me wanted him to appear again, and another part hoped he wouldn't. As I turned onto the street, my heart started racing because I could already see the yellow glow of the crooked light in the distance. And there he was, like he had a schedule to follow. Same posture, same jacket, same way of walking. The camera was pointed directly at the sidewalk, so I watched both the screen and the street, trying not to blink. As my car got closer, I noticed something different. He seemed to be looking slightly upward this time, not directly at me, but almost as if he sensed the camera. When I was about 10 feet away, I felt my chest tighten because I knew exactly what would happen next. He was going to disappear, and that's exactly what happened. One frame showed him walking. The next frame showed nothing. No shadow, no movement. Nothing. I stopped the car a few seconds later, trying to breathe normally. My hand shook on the wheel because I had just recorded proof that this didn't make sense. I played the video back right there inside the car, and when I paused at the moment he should have been next to my window, I felt a shiver so strong it made my whole body tense. Even though the sidewalk was empty, the video showed him standing 3 houses before mine, staring directly at the camera. When I saw that, my whole body locked up. I knew exactly where those 3 houses before mine were, a very dark stretch of the street where the light barely reached. The video showed him standing there, completely motionless, as if he had been waiting for me. What freaked me out even more was that I had just turned onto the street moments earlier and hadn't seen anyone there. The camera showed something my own eyes hadn't seen seconds before. The image was clear enough to show that he was staring straight at my phone, as if he knew I was recording. I replayed the clip several times, trying to find some logical explanation, but every time I paused, it became more obvious this wasn't just some late-night walker. I thought about circling the block to see if he was still there, but some instinct told me not to. I drove home slowly, constantly checking the mirrors for any movement. Nothing, no person, no sound. When I parked, I stayed inside the car for several minutes, holding my phone with the video paused. The street felt too quiet, like something was hiding between the houses. Before getting out, I zoomed in again. I couldn't make out his expression, but the way he stood there, the stillness of it, felt like he was waiting for me to react. I finally forced myself out of the car, rushed inside, locked every door, checked the windows twice, and kept all the lights on. I sat on the couch, replaying that piece of the recording over and over. The more I watched, the more uncomfortable I felt, because there was a detail I hadn't noticed at first. He wasn't just looking in the camera's direction. He was facing exactly where my car would be a few seconds later, as if he already knew the route I was about to take. That hit me hard. What if he didn't just appear randomly? What if he had been watching me long before I ever noticed him? Skimming through the footage again, I suddenly noticed something else. A faint distortion right behind him. The kind that appears when something moves too fast for the camera to capture. It wasn't a clear figure, just a subtle shift in light in a place where nothing should have moved. That street is always the same. Dark houses, empty yards, no big trees. Seeing that subtle flicker made my stomach twist. I turned the video off immediately and tossed the phone onto the couch like it was hot. My mind started spinning with possibilities. None of them good. What if he wasn't disappearing? What if he was just reappearing closer each time at wherever I lived? I got up and went to the window again, opening the curtain just a sliver. The street was empty, still completely silent, but the silence itself felt wrong, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I shut the curtain quickly and locked the door again, even though it was already locked. Something in me kept repeating, if he was there tonight, then he'd probably been there before too. Maybe that was why he always vanished before passing my car. Maybe he wasn't trying to walk past me. Maybe he was trying to get closer to my house. I couldn't shake the tremor in my hands. Sometime around midnight, I grabbed an old flashlight from my room. I stood in the dark for a few seconds, listening to nothing but my heartbeat. Then I lifted the curtain again and shined the beam outside. The light revealed the sidewalk, the yard, part of the road. Nothing. Then I shifted the flashlight slightly to the right. The beam caught something on the ground. Footprints in the patch of dirt near my trash cans. They weren't sharp prints, but they were clear enough. Someone had stepped there recently. The drizzle from earlier made the ground soft. I hadn't been there. None of my neighbors walked through that area. And the prints lined up exactly with the 3 houses before mine spot from the video. I almost opened the door to check, but something deep inside stopped me. Like every instinct I had was screaming not to step outside. I shut the curtain hard and leaned against the door, trying to calm my breathing. All I could think was, if he was there tonight, then he already knew where I lived. Maybe he always knew. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that paused frame. Him standing in the darkest part of my street, staring directly into the camera, as if he knew I'd be watching it later. Around 5 a.m., when the sky started turning pale, the heavy feeling finally faded a bit. I checked outside one last time. Everything looked normal again. The footprints were drying, barely visible now. The video was still on my phone, but I didn't have the courage to watch it again. The next night, I changed my route. I don't drive through that street anymore. And even months later, I still have the same feeling. If I ever go back there at the same time of night, he'll be there too. Walking in the same spot, same rhythm, ready to disappear the moment I get too close.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.